Thank you so much. And I start by saying how happy I am for this opportunity to present my work. I will not go into any technical details, technical philosophical details, but I have framed the question of vocation in a more general manner, which I hope will address, if not all, then at least many here. And I hope that we can continue discussion after the presentation. I will start by framing the issue as a question, and actually a series of questions. The first one is as follows: is science a profession or a vocation for us? Does my discipline, whatever it might be, have a vocational value for me in addition to its professional value? Or can we still practice science in a vocational manner? And finally, is it possible for a person to have a science, any science, as a vocation? You might notice that all these questions are indexical in a sense that they refer to persons in the first person singular or in the first person plural. So the question concerns me, you, or us as scientists. I will not answer these questions, since I've argued, and I argue here too, but argued in a series of papers that these questions are personal in a very deep manner, which means that they can only be answered by persons for themselves. So there is no expertise about vocations. Vocations are for us, and we are responsible for them, for ourselves and our relationships to them. But I will provide a philosophical explication of the concept of vocation that may help us answer this question for ourselves. Just a small remark before proceeding. I'm talking about science in a very broad sense, so in a sense of the German word Wissenschaft, which means not just the natural sciences, it also entails the human sciences, the humanistic sciences, the social sciences. So, I mean, the remark down was just about this Wissenschaft sense of science. To concretize and motivate the question, I show you a small example. The question then could be, how does a task such as this relate to your scientific work? This is from a Finnish supervision manuscript, directions how to take care of scientific supervision. And if you look at section 3, it says, select general comments as a comment type if you wish to comment on a study plan on a general level. Select targeted comment if you want to address the study plan on a specific level. These are my professional tasks. And each day I asked if these tasks had anything to do with my vocational task, which is to philosophize and teach philosophy. So this is just to motivate to think about the difference between a profession and a vocation. The motivating question then would be in concreto, if this professional task that I showed you of supervision to target the general and the specific ones has any relation, real or imaginable, to our scientific and scholarly work? And if not, then for what reason? What is the reason why there is no relation between the professional task and the vocational task? And I hope that my account of vocation allows us to answer this question for ourselves. In order to start answering, we have to understand sciences as a specific kind of practices. They are epistemic practices, practices of knowing, producing knowledge, evaluating knowledge. They have their epistemic goals, tasks, and methods. They are delimited by different kinds of epistemic subject matters and guided by epistemic values. Such values entail, for example, the value of a truth or evidence, the value of correspondence with reality, the power of explanation and prediction, consistency, clarity, distinction, completeness, elegance even in mathematics. So these are examples of epistemic values that define our vocations, a scientific vocation. Science then is unified by the formal goals of establishing a system of justified and grounded cognitions. So this is just to give you an idea of what I mean by science in this very general Wissenschaft sense of science. I skip some points. And I just show you some of the plurality of sciences here. We have the empirical sciences and the what sometimes called pure sciences, non-empirical sciences, such as mathematics and logic, for example. We have the natural sciences, the human sciences, the human including social sciences and humanistic sciences. We have pure and applied sciences. We have theoretical and normative sciences. All this can be a vocational task for us. And all these can also be non-vocational tasks, just professional ones. So I start with a small tentative definition of vocation. What they are complexes of intentional acts and attitudes that are governed by a volitional act of willing and motivated by a personal valuing emotion. They are very complex. They involve valuations, volition, and cognitions of a very specific kind, such that they are crucial for us as persons. As such, they differ from theoretical units, such as theories and disciplines, which don't necessarily address us as persons. They also differ from political ideologies, which we may choose as vocations, but which do not have to be vocations, that can also be completely without this personal character. More precisely, a vocation entails a decision about what ought to be or what ought to be done, both what ought to be and what ought to be done, and a commitment to the realization of this ought, these self-established obligations of both being and acting, what we have to do for the value to be realized, and what has to be for it to be good. As such, vocations have three crucial features, and I try to say something about them all. I just list them first. They are deeply personal, they have very complex temporalities, and they have double origins. They can be inherited from others, but they can also be invented. So we can invent vocations, vocational tasks. I try to say something about all of these, but if you just give me a hint about the times, then I know how fast I should go. 7 minutes left. Okay, good. First, about the personal character of vocations. It entails also three aspects. The first is that vocations are established on a ground of a deeply experienced personal values, values that call us and oblige us to realizing activities and actions. We commit ourselves to these values, vocational values, by volitional acts of willing, acts of deciding. Second, as such, they govern our lives as wholes, not just individual acts and actions or practices, but our lives as wholes that involve different kinds of acts, practices, and acts. We thereby dedicate ourselves and devote our powers and resources to the realization of the value. Such realizing activity takes extended periods of our lives, and even potentially the whole life, such as in Lily's case. The vocation to truth and a certain kind of truth, the philosophical truth, took all of her life to a certain age of studies to the end. Finally, they are indexical in a sense that they require our resources, both intellectual and material ones, both mental, intellectual, social, collaborative, communicative, and material, institutional, economical, for example. I have listed Schrödinger, a physicist, as a limit case who had a vocation to music in addition to physics, but he lacked the skill. So the resources were limited. We can have vocations without having the resources to realize those values that are vocational for us. Sometimes these values that ground vocations are called values of love. I have a small note about that. It doesn't entail anything soft or feminine. It's actually the term love here is actually our very core. It's about our autonomy as value, as people who have values and are able to promote values. I skip this. Then a few words about the temporal complexity. Values are relatively permanent, vocations are relatively permanent and stable. They are potentially lifelong, as already mentioned. So they differ from momentary actions and acts, decisions and beliefs. They are prospective or futural. They open whole futures for us. As scientists, we are not just interested in tomorrow, but we are also interested in next year, perhaps even the next generation who are able to help us realize our goals. They entail an optimistic character here because they open a future. They are also periodical. We can interrupt the vocation for a while, take care of some other stuff and go back to it tomorrow to continue the realizing activities. So we don't have to be completely each minute tied to them. We are able to interrupt them and go back to them. They are periodical. They are non-sequential. They organize our lives in a non-sequential manner, in a hierarchical manner, and periodically. I skipped the last point. Double origins. They can be both inherited and invented. I skipped this. I want to go to very challenging parts, which concerns the situation in which we have several vocations, several values that oblige us in this very unconditional manner. Sometimes these conflicts, these conflicting values, I have to skip some of these, sorry. Sometimes these conflicting values demand a temporary sacrifice of the other vocation. So imagine that you have a child crying in the next room and you are in the middle of completing a chemical experiment, which has to be done now. The child is crying, the experiment is here. You can't do both, you have to choose. You abandon one and sacrifice the one for the completion of the other. But you can go back to the experiment after and then perhaps organize it again. So there is a temporary sacrifice which allows you to go back, and you're not abandoning the vocation forever. These are just examples, I skip them. However, permanent sacrifices, irreversible and non-compensable sacrifices are also possible. Such sacrifices are tragic in the sense that they entail self-loss and unavoidably lead to lifelong sadness. So if you are like Schrödinger or Heisenberg, vocated to both music and physics, you have to make a choice because you can't dedicate your whole life to both things in order to make them the best possible. So you have to sacrifice one of those vocational values. And such sacrifice, you can't avoid self-loss and sadness, lifelong sadness. Examples, there is a well-known example by the novel, William Styles' novel, Sophie's Choice, when she has to choose, she's forced to choose between her two children. But the more better known example is Abraham's choice between God and Isaac. So he has two values. He can't dedicate his time exactly now for both. conflicting values, and he has to choose. Happily, God intervenes. Just a few pictures. Here I have an example of a philosopher that had two vocations. This is Jean-Paul Sartre. He was vocated to philosophy and to literature. He was able to combine them, so it's possible to combine two vocations in a happily way. Iris Murdoch also was able to combine her love for philosophy and her love for writing. So two happy examples. But then a less happy example, Art Garfunkel from Simon and Garfunkel. He had a vocation for mathematics and abandoned it for music. And another musician, Brian May from the band Queen, he also had two vocational values for music and for physics. He abandoned physics, but in his later age was able to go back to that abandoned vocation, recover it after a complete loss and sadness, and doctorate in physics. These examples just show you that these examples of tragic sacrifice just show us that it's possible to abandon a vocation and the personal values that oblige us to realizing activities. But it is possible only on the cost, on the price of a lifelong sadness and self-loss. And then my question to you is, if the contemporary, it's a political science, political question, if our contemporary academy actually demands such sacrifices from us, when we have to try to fit our vocational values into our professional structures that may not be actually supporting of those values. Thank you for your patience.
Yeah, thank you very much of this very thought-provoking presentation. We have some time for discussion. So please, Anki will come with the microphone.
Maybe I'm trivializing what you were saying, but 60 years ago, I was graduating from high school here in Helsinki, and I went to a information occasion where representatives for various professions were describing how you could train, what kind of training or institutions of training you should enter, universities or other schooling, modes of schooling, and finally a professional nurse described nursing. And then a skeptical girl stood up and asked, but why are nurses so poorly paid? And the normative answer that came from this professional nurse was, well, nursing is a vocation. And that's why the girls should be happy with the low salary. And something similar was mentioned by an officer who described the officers' cadet school. And again, there was this skeptical question, why are officers paid so little? But then you have to understand what's the answer, that being an officer is a vocation. Maybe I trivialized what you were saying, but
no, actually, it's a good answer, because the low payment, both in the cases of the nurses, which we experienced with COVID, and now the low payment of officers in the case of Ukraine, just shows us that we don't value what these people are doing. And they, of course, value what they're doing because they have their vocational relation, but we have no vocation for our health, nor for our security, which I would say just shows our dumbness or stupidity in a long run. So if we don't appreciate the vocational work that both nurses and officers are doing, for us, and that kind of allow us to then fulfill our own vocations, both taking care of our security and then also our health, then I just kind of can't find that that would tell anything about their vocations. The trial tells about our own vocations.
Okay, next one, Pauline von Bunstorff.
Thank you, Sara. I think you ask a very important question, and it's not a question one can answer quickly, but I was just wondering, your examples, I think, were mostly of people who had a vocation for science in some Wissenschaft sense, and then for an art on the other side. Is that a kind of a coincidence, or is there something deeper there? And I ask this because, I mean, as an art researcher myself and a little bit of a philosopher, I know that there is a lot that indicates that precisely combining these two areas somehow might be very stimulating, and there are people who actually claim that in a sense human beings need both. But I was just curious about this situation. Thank you.
Actually, the concept of vocation is very, very general. So we can have a vocation to a person. A mother can be vocated to the care of the child. So the concept of vocation is not at all restricted to these larger projects such as science and art. But I took science and art here because it addresses us all. And actually the comparison between science and art is very illuminative, because both are vocations which are inherited, have a history. So they are not invented by us. We can invent, we can add inventions into a scientific vocation or an artistic vocation, but we are bound to a very, very long history, but also to a future of generative production. So art and science are similar kinds of vocations, having a very thick history, both behind us and in the front of us. A vocation to a child, to a lover, to a friend, is differently temporalized. So I took these two because they kind of illuminate one another, but there are also important differences. Science is much more a kind of communal work, working together in a community, contemporary community. Art allows, at least in many cases, much more solitary, isolated practices, even if that is also communal in its very deep manner. Finally, I wanted to talk about science and music, because I've been reading about how physicists describe their relations to music, and they almost all say that what they see, what is same, is love of structures and love of certain kinds of developing structures. So I find it very interesting to kind of look at the very specific comparison between physicists and musicians. But it's a very important question, and I think it also raises the question that what is our responsibility for the next generation of Finnish physicists or philosophers or literary studies persons? We have a certain kind of responsibilities also for the coming generations when we are very much pressed by our professional tasks. So it's a very important political question too.
Thank you. We have two more questions, Jussi Pakkasvirta and then Eero Tarasti.
Thank you very much, Sara, for an interesting presentation. You mentioned the interdisciplinary research work in some moment in your presentation. I was thinking that, for example, it might be like a vocational kind of problem. If you know the fashionable way of doing interdisciplinary research, at the same time, the challenge is doing that. There is some kind of compromising issue always when you are choosing between the different research attitude or epistemologies. It's anyway, obviously, professional or vocational. But in the sense, there are, for example, combining research and art, for example. Often in many fields of research, you have to discuss and understand that kind of points. As a historian, many times you are working somehow with that kind of vocations, where even your hobbies can be vocational issues.
Yes.
How do you combine that with the interdisciplinary aspect? Thank you.
Yes, so my kind of knowledge of interdisciplinary work comes from two fields: cognitive science and then gender studies, which are very different in kind. So I have been trying to think about these and what the kind of, what is the interest and what draws one to such projects. And in both cases, at least in my case and some cases that I'm trying to think through, it's a theme. The theme is more kind of has more value or is more important than any methods. So the theme kind of has a kind of obliging, gives an obliging task to us, and then we try to use several different methods in order to say the best we can about this one specific topic. So I think interdisciplinary work is more, the vocation is more in the understanding of the theme or the topic rather than in being very much indebted to methods. And in a person's career that can change. One can vary this. One can be more focused on the method and more focused on the topic or the theme. So I think this can, I mean, interdisciplinary work can be understood. I think that vocational analysis allows us to understand it, but also understand its difference from very strongly disciplinary work where the method often is where our love is kind of focused on the method, on the one method or one set of methods.
Okay, thank you. And then the concluding comment from which combines music and science, Eero Torasti, please.
Can you hear me? Yes. Well, thank you very much for an extremely fascinating and provocative and evocative speech. You had so many themes which we'd like to discuss, but one is of course concerning me personally very deeply, namely this music and science, because, well, I feel I'm a musician. This morning I played 3 hours chamber music in the university main hall with my musicians, and now I'm sitting here in the meeting of the scientists. So, but, I feel that you may be right in that sense that there sometimes might be a conflict between these two roles, to be a musician and to be a scientist. For instance, if I go to a congress or meeting of semiotics or philosophy, they say me, oh, Tarasti is not a semiotician, he's a musician. And if I go to a meeting of musicology, they tell me, oh, Tarasti is not a musicologist, he's a semiotician. So I can never be sure which is my identity. However, you said that it leads necessarily to the tragical sadness. No, I don't feel that I'm very tragical with this double identity, but because there might be a personality type who is able perhaps to synthesize and combine this, maybe even triple identity or quadruple identity if there are many activities. So, but anyway, I thank you very much for taking this problem.
Yes, I think you are actually kind of exemplifying a person such as Iris Murdoch or Sartre. Some people are able to combine two vocations in a very creative manner. So they as if create a new kind of topic, musicology, which is also related to the performing of music. So I think we have the possibility of synthetically creating new vocations, but not everybody is so lucky. And sometimes one's talents come as a restriction, or sometimes there are other situational features that just inhibit that combination. And then the end result of that is then this lifelong sadness and self-loss. And I congratulate you because you have not experienced any such sadness. Thank you.